This is my Ducati ST2, and when I got it, it was completely dead. Now, in the last video, I replaced the front half of the wiring loom and managed to get it running, and all appeared good until I took it out for a test drive, and it would seem that the battery wasn't charging because I broke down with a flat battery, completely no juice whatsoever, at the roundabout half a mile down the road. And yes, I had to push it back. This means one of a few things. The alternator isn't producing AC voltage. The regulator rectifier isn't rectifying that voltage to DC, or it's not regulating that voltage to the 14.5-ish volts that is needed to charge the battery, or the battery is completely kaput. So I need to do some tests with the voltmeter. For the purposes of this test, I've removed the side panel and charged up the battery, which appears to have charged up okay and holding charge, so I think the battery's probably okay. I have disconnected the alternator and extended the wires so I can attach these to my voltmeter, because the first test is to see if the alternator is producing AC voltage. Now, the AC voltage will go up as the revs of the engine increase and drop back down as they decrease. I'm no expert, but I think somewhere around 5,000 RPM, it's supposed to be about 50 volts AC. Voltmeter is set up in AC voltage, so you can see it. I need to go find the key for the bike. So I'll start the bike. The RPMs will probably be about 2,000, and then it should read about, I don't know, 20 volts AC, somewhere in that area. That's the wrong key. Okay, ready, teddies? So what we got? We got 30 volts, 2,500 RPM. Just pull the fast idle out a little bit more. 35 volts AC at 2,800 RPM. 3,000 RPM, 50-ish volts, 4,000, 65 volts. So that appears to be working properly. I mean, the voltage is a bit high. I don't know what to expect really, but if I hold the clutch in, it sounds a lot nicer, obviously, because it's a dry clutch on this. There we go, hold the clutch in and do it. So that's at 2,000 RPM, 26 volts AC. 3,000 RPM, 45-ish volts, 40 volts. I'll have to do some research on the correct voltages. Okay, so I've changed the range that the voltmeter is reading because it was kind of well, it stopped reading. So now if I build the revs up, right, so let's go, that's 4,500 RPM and it's 73 volts. There's 6,000 RPM and it's 98 volts, so, God, that's loud. Maybe those voltages are a bit high, so I'll do some research and see what I can find out. Okay, so according to what I can find on the interwebs, and trust me, there is not a lot of information out there on this particular bike, because they only put this alternator on this bike for like 1 year or something like that. From what I can find, it seems to be reading normal. So at 3,000 RPM, it should be about 50 volts, and this is about 45. So I think that's probably about right. So the next test I need to do is to see if the rectifier regulator is rectifying the voltage from DC to AC. No, AC to DC. So I'm going to unplug the alternator, plug it into the rectifier, and then we'll be able to measure what's coming out of the rectifier. Right, so because I put my little plug-in socket on here, disconnect the test wire, plug the rectifier back into the alternator, try to anyway. There we go, that's in. Right, now this connector here is the connector that comes out of the rectifier. So we should be getting about 14.5 volts-ish DC on those connectors. So first things first, I'm going to start the bike and see if we've got DC volts or AC volts. That will tell us if it's swapping them over or not. Right, now it's warmed up, be nice and quiet. You know what, I might get a cable tie and just hold the clutch in, just for my sanity. That's a brilliant idea. That sounds nicer. Okie dokie. So it turns out this test is actually a little bit null and void, because I think that the rectifier regulator thing requires the 12 volts DC from the battery to be able to do its job of changing the AC voltage to the DC voltage and regulating it to the 14.5 volts. So without the connection to the battery, I don't think the rectifier regulator is going to work. Either way, this test was a complete and utter waste of time, it turns out. Now I'm sure there is a way of testing the rectifier regulator without having it connected to the battery, but I don't know what that way is. So, and I certainly didn't know what that way was when I'm actually creating this video. So you got a little bit of a voiceover for this one. The way I ended up testing this regulator is measuring the voltage on the battery with it all connected and the bike running. Now there should be somewhere between sort of 14.5 volts, something like that. And I measured it and it wasn't charging the battery. It was only showing me the measurement of the 12 volts that was in the battery, and obviously that was declining as the bike was running because it was only using the battery power to run the bike. Make sense? Fingers point at faulty regulator. Rectifier, regulator, RR. Okay, well, I've got another one, which I sourced from the eBay. Now, this is a electricsworld.co.uk RR50. It's not new. It's a second-hand one. Managed to get it really cheap. Came off a working bike, well, working running bike that was stood up because it had a seized starter motor. So in theory, this should work fine on the bike. So I will do that. I've got to pop this front fairing off to be able to do it. So I'll do that, swap it all over, and then we'll see where we're at. Side panels removed, front upper fairing removed, wing mirrors removed. Basically, they hold the fairing on there. Now, the rectifier regulator thingy is here, attached under there. It's bolted to the chassis of the bike in aid of cooling it with thermal conductivity. However, thermal transfer, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to replace it like for like using some heat transfer paste on the back of it, and we'll go from there. So all I've got to do is pop this lower fairing off now and unwire it and wire the new one in. So I'm going to do that. I found some paperwork to suggest that this was replaced in May, just before the MOT, and it's done a couple of 100 miles since then. Now, if you look at the back of that, that looks pretty clean and shiny. And on the underside there, it looks like they haven't replaced or added any more thermal transfer paste onto there. So chances are this was replaced and it's gone faulty quite quickly because it's got hot, because the heat from it hasn't been able to transfer itself to the cooling area that is designated for it. Also, another indication that the regulator, that's what I'm going to call it now, the regulator, isn't working, because these two wires here, the black wire and the white wire, go up to this connector here, which then goes into this battery light, which should illuminate if there is a problem with the charging system, and it wasn't illuminating, which means this wasn't sending 12 volts DC to that battery light to indicate a fault. Now, I know the light works because I stuck 12 volts on it the other day. Ooh, there's a bike going past. It's not a bike. What the? This is the back of the replacement rectifier. I'm just cleaning it up with some acetone before I apply some super heat sink compound. Cool. I have wiped both surfaces with acetone and make sure that that's nice and, what do you call it, attached. So the idea is that the air, while you're riding along, blows into this scoop and cools it down. However, there have been various reports of people suggesting that you relocate this. However, I'm going for stock just to see if we can actually get it so it's right. Now, I think the application of this heatsink compound will actually make quite a lot of difference compared to how it was. Why does it feel like I'm doing something wrong? Oh, it's just the Allen key's just spinning. That one. Nice and tight so it gets a real good thermal contact with the bike. Now, the blue connector I've put on there is not the stock one. It's a different one because when I got the bike, the original connector from the alternator had been chopped off, which is a very common modification because the connector it creates a bad contact and it gets hot apparently and burns and catches fire. So a lot of people replace the connector with soldered connections. Now, if I'm being honest, I don't have a soldering iron that is powerful enough to solder those wires together. So I've put a connector on there instead. Okay, I might have gone a bit too jealous with this heat paste compound, but never mind. So yeah, I've used the connector that I deemed worthy of the connection. If I have to replace it in the future, I have to replace it in the future. I've got no problem with that. But for the purposes of this, it will actually be okay for now. Like I said, I can always upgrade it. Right, that's on there. That goes in there. Now this one threads up. I probably should have paid attention as to where that went. I think it just came out here. Okay. Yeah. Whoop, whoop. Okay, I think we're ready to test once I've plugged that back in. Okie doke, so let's get old Flukey out. I'm going to call him Luke the Fluke. Ah, okay. Right, I've just turned the ignition on and plugged it back into the bike. I've actually got a battery light now, which is good, because that wasn't working before. So let's have a look and see what the battery's charging at now. I think we've got success, guys. So can you see that? We're now charging at 14 volts, which is what we want. If I increase the rate a little bit, do we still get just 14 volts? Yep, 14 volts. Okay, we're now regulating and rectifying. We're rectifying. So at 5,000 RPM, we're still only charging at 14 volts. Don't know if you heard that or not. What I said was, at 5,000 RPM, I'm still only charging at 14 volts, which is good. It's not going up or down, but it is actually charging the battery now. So I think that is problem solved. And that doesn't feel like it's getting super warm. So, like I said, the battery light being on has actually filled me with confidence that I've made a good positive change. And I'm reading 14 volts charging into the battery, which I wasn't getting before. Before I was getting, well, I wasn't charging it at all. It was just reading the battery voltage, which was forever decreasing because it was dying because the bike was running. Anyway, waffling on, I'm going to get the panels back on. Whoop, whoop. Successful day. I may have spoken a little bit too soon there. So watch this. Battery light on. Engine running, battery light still on. Give it some beans, battery light goes off. So If the idle's too low, the battery light comes on. Maybe that's just a Ducati thing. I will try and always be as optimistic as I can be with things like this. It does appear to be charging the battery. However, I'm not super filled with confidence because of that battery light coming on. Now, I don't know if that's teething issues with the new installation or if that rectifier is on its way out, but it's doing one thing more than it was before, and that is displaying a battery light at all. So I'm happy that I've made a positive change, and obviously it's now charging the battery at the voltage that it should be charging the battery. So what I'm going to do is put it back together and take it for a ride and see how it rides. Obviously I'm not going to go too far because the last thing I want to do is push it back again. I'll keep an eye on, well, it was misfiring before because obviously it wasn't generating enough electricity to make a good consistent spark. And when I came back, I charged the battery up fully and then took it around the car park a couple of times and it didn't misfire at all, which kind of proves that theory correct. Lost an Allen key. What have I done with that? So that's the plan. Put it back together, take it for a ride, and go from there, really. I have actually ordered the camera, like I said I'd ordered, but Royal Mail has let me down, unfortunately. I ordered it on Friday, last Friday. It's now this Friday. It's Friday today, so a week ago. It was dispatched on the Friday by the seller, so no fault of theirs. And it has been in the Midlands sorting office since 4 o'clock Sunday morning. And it was supposed to, well, it was sent on a tracked 48-hour. Unfortunately, there's nothing I can do. As the receiver, the sender has to deal with Royal Mail. Now, I'm pretty sure it's going to end with them giving me a full refund and me having to order the camera from somewhere else. No, I found it. It was brand new, factory sealed on eBay, and it was, I think, 50 quid cheaper than buying it directly from DJI. But I think this time what I might do is what I did with the microphone and buy it brand new directly from DJI. And then it might actually turn up. Right. Okay, so I'm going to finish putting this back together. And then, well, see you in a bit. Okay, so we're back together. I'll take this around the car park and see if that battery light starts to behave itself and check that the bike is actually charging itself. So I'm going to do that. Next time I will take you out on the bike. Hopefully I will have my camera by then. But until then, thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers! The bike cooled down a bit. Admittedly, I went a little bit further than the car park, and I can confirm that it runs sweet. Cheers.
I never really know